Thank you all for coming to this session dealing with the Children's Services Act. And we have a good panel here of people who understand this business and will be able to take us through it and give us some insights as to what's going on there. First of all, I'd like to introduce our three panelists, starting off with Senator Monty Mason. Senator Mason represents the first state Senate district, including the city of Williamsburg and parts of Newport News, James City County, Hampton, York County, and Suffolk. He was twice elected to the House of Delegates in the 93rd District in 2013 and 15, before being elected to the Senate in 2016. During his tenure in the legislation, Senator Mason has worked to improve child welfare systems, protect seniors, serve our veterans, create opportunities for small businesses, and improve education for Virginia's children. He has worked to better the foster care system in Virginia by carrying legislation to implement the Families First Prevention Services Act, bringing federal dollars to the Commonwealth for the prevention services. In the Senate, he serves as the Commerce and Labor Committee, Privileges and Election Committee, Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee, Agriculture, Conservation, Natural Resources Committee, and the General Laws and Technology Committee. Okay. He also serves as the State Executive Council for Children's Services and the Behavioral Health Commission, among other appointments to boards and committees. Senator Mason's career in business spans more than 25 years and includes working in real estate with Land America Financial Group and in the financial sector with more than a decade of Visa Incorporated in fraud and risk management. Senator Mason is a 1989 graduate of William & Mary, where he earned his BA in government. Supervisor Meg Bohmke?
Bomke.
Bomke. All right.
It's German.
Okay. Meg Bohmke is VACO's president-elect. She was first elected in the Stafford County Board of Supervisors in November 2013 to represent the Falmouth District. She was elected chairman by her fellow board members for 2018 and again for 2020. Supervisor Bomke previously served on the Stafford County School Board for 4 years, beginning in November of 2009. She worked in public finance for 13 years, most recently for Prudential-based Securities and Sutra & Company, where she structured short and long-term municipal bond issues that were sold in the capital markets. Supervisor Bomke holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Florida State University. Scott Reiner has been the Executive Director of the Office of Children's Services since June 2016. He is responsible for all functions at the Office of Children's Services, providing comprehensive oversight to the Virginia's Children's Services Act, including training and technical assistance, financial operations, audit and compliance monitoring, information technology, and outcomes evaluation. Children's services through the CSA include those in the child welfare, special education, juvenile justice, and behavioral health systems. Scott came to OCS after 26 years with the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice. Scott has his undergraduate degree from Brandeis University and a master's degree in clinical psychology from Syracuse University. So please welcome all of our panelists today. We will start off with Scott, who will give us his presentation, and then we'll get on to the others.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sure enough.
Supervisor Frank. And good morning.
Morning.
Hope you're well. The past 2 years have been ones of unimaginable change. So I could stop with that because there's no debate. And while the Children's Services Act has certainly not been immune to the challenges related to COVID-19, there are several changes now that we are hopefully, perhaps, seeing the backside of this. But there are changes both underway, completed, and on the near horizon that are independent of the pandemic. And so you've heard from Supervisor Frame, who's going to speak with you about this morning. And I want to thank VACO, Dean Lynch, and Katie Boyle for the invitation to be here today, along with Senator Mason and Supervisor Bomke. So I thought I would just start just to put a grounding on the scope of the Children's Services Act. And as you can see, this spans the existence of CSA, which was enacted and implemented on July 1, 1993. So this chart spans the scope. The blue bars are the number of state and local dollars that annually have been expended on serving the number of children in the red line that CSA serves. And as Supervisor Frame said in my introduction, we serve children in the child welfare system. We serve children receiving certain special education services, those referred from juvenile justice and from the behavioral health system, as well as those whose parents bring them to the CSA for assistance. And you can see that for the first time in FY 2021, that's the very right-hand bar, our expenses, first time in a long time, have leveled off after really many years of ongoing growth between 2 and 6, 7% a year. Funds for services for children who go to residential settings. So these are the young people who are most challenged by psychiatric and psychological problems. And foster care saw a significant decrease in FY21. But those decreases were offset by increases in private special education costs, as well as some community-based services, which we don't really have a lot of grief about because those are the most inexpensive services and those that we think in the end have the most potential for assisting kids and families. And for those of you who represent local government, those community-based services carry with them the most preferential share of match that the state provides, whereas other services carry a higher local share requirement. The number of children did decline by about 5%. So although costs overall remain flat, children that we serve declined, indicating a slight rise in the per child, per family cost. The best explanation we have for these trends in 2021 are simply the ongoing impact of the pandemic, with children and families not getting referred for services, being under the radar in many ways. And we are curious and anxious to see what FY 2022 brings. I can tell you that already we're about a quarter into the year. Costs and services have rebounded close to the FY 20 numbers. So we would expect that that trend may not continue to be flat. So I come from the north, as you might be able to tell. And even in a state where I was born, New York, that blue bar in the last 2 years represents $438 million of state and federal, state and local share. And even in New York, they think that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And I know for many of you who work in local government and who have to balance a local budget, the amount of cost that CSA brings is not insubstantial. I would, just because folks who haven't been around forever associate those costs with the CSA program, and in fact, that's correct. But what I would, want to remind you is that prior to CSA, back in before 1993, those costs still rested with local government. The CSA did not create new entitlements that local governments didn't already have a share of responsibility for. So it's just which door the money is going out. So it's not really CSA that's responsible and driving those costs as much as it is the needs and difficulties that children and families are facing and that they seek government assistance for. So I'll just kind of editorialize that a little bit. So 12 months ago, JLARC released its most recent report on the CSA. Previously, they had looked at us in 2016, I think, focusing on residential care. But this past year's study had two main areas of focus. One was the cost, administration, and oversight of private day special education, which is the single most costly service that we provide per child per year, as well as the one that's accounted for almost all of that growth that you see over the last 6-7 years, almost exclusively comes from the increased number and cost of serving students with disabilities who are referred by the public schools for private special education services under federal law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So they did look, JLARC did look and make several recommendations about how private special education is managed, as well as the second major focus was a more general look at CSA operations at the state and local level. So I thought I would just highlight a couple of things. First, let me talk about the special education part of JLARC's study, which there were like 8 recommendations. Many of them made it into 2 pieces of legislation. And Senator Mason was responsible for the S version of it, Senate. And I don't know if 1313 is like a lucky number or an unlucky number, but Senator Mason patroned the Senate version, 1313, and Delegate Van Valkenburg from Henrico happens to be my delegate, patroned 2117 on the House side. It did a couple of things. It created, for the first time in many, many years, a new eligibility for CSA funding, which was to allow students returning from private special education who had been there for 6 months, who are returning to the public schools, to be supported with CSA funding for transitional services to increase the likelihood of their successful return. So we understand that this should generally be a cost neutral, if not a cost positive factor, because the students leaving private education's costs would shift, even if they shifted entirely back to the public schools. It's unlikely that it would, because the services in the public schools can be less expensive. So we see this as a cost neutral opportunity to create incentives to the public schools to accommodate students to return from private settings and back into the mainstream or regular education program. The bills also directed several accountabilities onto the private school providers, including licensing and some data reporting that mostly fall under the purview of the State Department of Education to enforce. And finally, and perhaps the most interesting and challenging piece is that the enactment clause of the legislation established a work group to make recommendations, including a direction to move the entire special education component, private special education, out of the Children's Services Act and over to the Department of Education for management and oversight, just to cut it out of CSA. And so that is a big change, be a big change. So we have been working on that. The enactment clause calls for a 2-year study work group. That work group has been meeting since June, has had 4 meetings, and issued, as you can see, a preliminary report just a couple of weeks ago. There are 4 subgroups that have been established: funding public schools, private schools, and pilot programs. And key issues are whether a transferred administration in the Department of Education will continue to carry with it what we call some sufficient funding. Many of you know that the largest overwhelming portion of CSA funding, and that is for students who are eligible because of their special education status, as well as because of their status as a child in foster care, or to prevent their entering foster care. Services to those children are what is established in the code is called sum sufficient. Specifically, the code reads that the General Assembly and the local governing body shall appropriate sum sufficient to meet the needs of the children meeting those 2 eligibility criteria. So what that means is, unlike many other state-funded programs, it's closer to Medicaid than it is to the budget of the Department of Behavioral Health, for example. If the number of children who are eligible rises and the cost of serving them rises, both the General Assembly and you all who sit on local governing bodies have no option but to provide the funding that's necessary. So how that would look in a transformed system with education is of great concern to everyone, because the services that these children receive are federally regulated, and so in that sense have to be provided and paid for. The other potentially interesting piece is at what match rate would these services be funded? The CSA has a match rate for every city and county. And you also know that every city and county also has another match rate called the local composite index. They are not the same. And it is quite possible, depending on what city or county you're in, that one match rate is preferential to another from a local perspective. And so how to figure out what that shift would look like at the local level is important. And figuring out some way to not shift costs from the state to the locality has got to be part of the discussion. Other parts of it not related to the finances include how we will ensure that students receive the services they need, the method in which VDOE will administer this program, and what are some current models that are operating and that we can learn from. You're going to hear before we leave today from Supervisor Bomke from Stafford, where they have been operating a pilot model program for a number of years. That's a publicly operated public-private type of program, separate program for students with significant disabilities. So a group has received data presentations from both OCS and DOE. Each subgroup has identified additional data it needs and the specific issues that have to be addressed before next November when the final report is done. And that will then go to the 2023 session. Is that right? 23, yeah. 23 session of the General Assembly for final action, along with the recommendations that go with it. In addition to the special ed part of the JLARC study, they looked at the overall operation of CSA. As you know, CSA, like social services and community service boards, are what we call a state supervised, locally administered program, which means my office and my governing body, the State Executive Council, in addition to whatever statutory direction we get, provides oversight. We provide reimbursement, we have policies, we enforce those policies, but the program is operated on a day-to-day basis in 130 separate cities and counties, because a couple of them combine their programs. And that there are local governing structures that are established by code and as to how those programs operate. You can imagine that there's some variability. The section of the code that governs CSA is not very long, and we have relatively little regulation, unlike certain other state programs that have volumes of regulation. So JLARC wanted to know whether there were ways to improve the state's operation and by extension, local operations of the programs. Two recommendations made their way into legislation. This first one was put forward by the JLARC chairman, Delegate Plum, and it amended the section, that's the section of the code that governs what my office is responsible for. So there are 18 things before you get to the new one, which is 19. And it basically directed us to use the data that we collect to more aggressively monitor local performance and to identify what were called underperforming. That was statute's word, not mine. Localities that were underperforming based on that data, and to go and try and to increase our level of assistance, and with the goal of those localities developing corrective action plans to improve their programs. Okay, We're in the process of implementing that. They gave us one additional position to do that. Mind you, we have a total staff of 15 to operate this program. So that was very well appreciated. We had a work group that had many local participants, including Katie Boyle from VACO, to identify the data that we'd be looking at and to develop a strengths-based approach. This isn't another audit. This is an effort. There's no punitive nature to this intervention, but rather an opportunity to work with local CSA governing teams called Community Policy and Management Teams and other local government representatives. How many of you might sit on a CPMT? There are, yeah, okay, yeah. So there are, there are county administrators and other folks who sit on those bodies to help assist them in improving their programs. As required, we submitted a report just last week, which, in case you're interested, is RD 573 on Legislative Information System. The second part of those requirements were for us to develop a plan for this General Assembly's consideration about how we could better assist localities in administering what those of you who sit on CPMTs understand is a fairly complex program. And so that plan, which we submitted, included a request for some additional positions to create what we're calling regional CSA consultants that would be based in 4 or 5 regions around the state and would be able to provide a lot more hands-on assistance than we're currently able to do. The second part of this, which we think is long overdue, is we additionally requested funds. The General Assembly allocates just a hair over $2 million a year for us to distribute to you all to administer the programs. That is hardly sufficient and hasn't been for a long time. So we did request the funding to raise every locality to a base threshold of $50,000, which would positively impact 114 of 133 localities. And that tells you that 114 localities receive less than that. To operate a program, pay a coordinator, handle, operate an office. It's really not sufficient. So we hope the current minimum support is just short of $14,000 a year. And it doesn't even begin to cover the cost. We recently surveyed localities, and the amount of money that you all are putting in addition to the really very small state share, is pretty significant. So we hope the General Assembly will look favorably on that. And that report is public. So, your advocacy arm in VACO and other folks, please feel free to support those recommendations and to get a hold of what we believe is to be long overdue additional support to local CSA programs. How's my time? What time is it?
You've got probably ought to be starting to wrap.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over this just to say, because Senator Mason may touch on this, we have been very thoroughly tied up with the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act. These are the same children we serve in foster care prevention. And the potential that this program, because of its federal funding, can provide important and effective services to children at risk of entering foster care with no local contribution. That's 50% federal, 50% state share that comes out of VDSS. And so that just started July 1, and it's a little early to tell what it's going to look like, but there's the potential that some very effective services can get into practice without additional local contributions, and some changes in the way that children in residential care who are in foster care are funded, that shifts some funding to Medicaid from the federal Title IV program, and may have some small negative financial impact on localities, because there is a piece of the Medicaid contribution, the state share that the localities are responsible for. So I think, okay, I'm going to go back and turn it over to my good colleague, Senator Mason, who, in addition to being responsible for Senate 1313, sits on the State Executive Council, which is my governing body. And I'll leave you this, although you may or may not need it.
I have to borrow Scott's slides. I don't know enough to have slides. So that's, but I was glad to see him ask, how many people serve on the CPMT. Now I understand why the bulk of you are here. I thought maybe y'all just were trying to see the internet broadband portion of this and we're just too polite to get up and walk out of the room. But I really did look through and try to figure out what brought you to this session, right? And I would guess that some of you came to this session through that participation and trying to learn more about it. And I would guess that some of you came to this because you look at the amount of money spent on this and are just trying to get your arms around. I mean, what exactly are we doing here? What's going on? And, they say go to Richmond, find something you're really well versed in, you understand, become an expert. Well, I knew absolutely nothing about child welfare or Family First when I was assigned the Family First effort for the state Senate. That should make you feel very comfortable, I'm sure. But actually, it is helpful in that I don't come with any preconceived notions. I don't come with any bias. I didn't work in this part of the industry or that part of the industry. I knew absolutely nothing. And so I start from scratch. That's, I guess, how they found me to be dumb enough to take the work group for a private day. And let's just try to figure that baby out. But let's start here with Family First. All right, Family First is an entire change in how we look at foster care, at child welfare, and it came from the federal government. And we know that just always clicks like a champion. Yeah. But the big thing to take away from this session about Family First, for the first time ever, we have the opportunity to fund prevention services. So we can try to get out in front of issues, family situations that are guaranteed known to you or known to your staffs that work on these matters. So now, they also set it up, there's a clearinghouse to put your evidence-based programs in and determine whether they'll pay. Well, there was a clearinghouse out of California, right? There was an operation, it worked, and it was perfect. And so the federal government picked another one that had never operated. It took forever to get that up and running. So it's taken some time for us to get to where we are. The key is right now we have a very limited amount of evidence-based training. We've got to get more companies interested in and established for evidence-based services that you can then reach out to them and provide, right? Or ask them to provide. How much local match goes into Family First money? Let's say that again. None, zero, okay? So our goal here is use federal money every chance we get. Our goal here is to find preventative programs that we can get out in front of children, families, and deal with these matters before they get into the child welfare system and we have an action, okay? So that's how important this is. We're right on the cusp of it, and so we're just getting started, but we need your help in your regions to drive that forward. I have been extremely concerned about the QRTP. There was a laundry list of things that had to be done. So in a pandemic, we asked these residential services providers, oh, just do these 15 pages of things and you're qualified. I was worried about it way more than Scott was early on because, again, I want us to use federal money rather than the Medicaid money and the CSA money that he was talking about, right? And I think we've come along. We started off very, very slowly, but now we've had more residential services become qualified. I hope that in your region we'll have those. I'll ask you to look out to them, for them, because if we can utilize them, once again, we're using federal money and not other monies. Okay, so that's what's important there. The Family First leads to a little bit of the child welfare and foster care, children that have the possibility of entering foster care. So we tried to have that as broad as we could to utilize that for Family First money. We've got a lot of work to do with foster care. When I first started doing this, I was told we're doing great. We have half the amount of children in foster care that most states in the country have. But we've got almost that equally amount that we divert to other locations to keep them out of foster care, largely in kinship programs. So by the time you add the two numbers up, we're kind of in there with everybody else. And the first question I asked was, how much do you get if you're in a kinship program, if you take in? And the answer was nothing. And that's why I picked a couple of guys that may have been around the Senate a little longer than I have. And I said, what do you think about, why do we not give kinship money? Well, shouldn't you want to take care of your relatives? Well, yeah, you should want to take care, and you do. But that 13-year-old boy eats a lot of food when he comes to your house, and you need some money to provide. So we tried to put a kinship care program in place that is just coming up and running. In my region, one thing I'm doing, the Commission on Youth just went around the state and interviewed children that have been in foster care, just to kind of a listening tour, to understand what they need, what they got, what they didn't get. When it came to our area, I then, after that, tried to take it in, currently trying to take it to the next level, to focus on children that are aging out of foster care. On the Virginia Peninsula alone, there are 197 kids between 16 and 18 years old that are on the cusp of aging out of foster care. What do they need? Everything. They need jobs, they need IDs, they need cars, they need money, they need a place to live, they need help. And there's not a lot of help out there for them. So what we did is we sat down with our trauma-informed network, we sat down with the chambers of commerce, we sat down with the business community, and and the faith communities, and we just kicked off and started, hey, what are we going to, you need employees, right? I got 200 people that need an employer, but they need help also. They're going to need an additional level. They're going to need extra help. They're going to have trauma. And so that's also, you may have seen the First Lady going around doing a tour about trauma-informed networks. We are taking that to the chambers of commerce and saying, you don't think it impacts you, right? Well, how come that guy hasn't been at work for the last, keeps missing work? Well, it's because he's got a problem with his aunt who maybe needs mental health treatment, or his child is having issues. There's trauma in the background of your employee that is leading to him or her not being able to be there. If you understand that better, if you do better with that, then we can help take a broader look at the picture. As far as the private day goes, the JLARC study, Scott's exactly right. You saw the numbers going up, right? And way up, that's a lot of money. And did you hear him say the word some sufficient? Right? So however much it costs is how much money we put into that. Well, I think a fair amount of people went into the JLARC study hoping that they'd find private days opulent and expensive and cost a lot of money spent. Well, it found that they're not making but about a 6% profit. But it did find that children are entering private day earlier with more acute issues and staying longer. All right, so this is not unlike, I do a lot of mental health work as well. This is not unlike our state hospitals in the behavioral health system. We only want people in the state hospitals that absolutely positively need that level of treatment and care. So if we're sending a geriatric with dementia to a state-run mental facility, we are failing. If we're sending someone with substance abuse to the mental hospital because we don't have somewhere else, we are failing. It is occupying beds for things that it is not designed for. So in the private day circumstance, we want children to be treated and helped in the least restrictive environment, that's the law, but as local and as close to you as it can be. Therefore, only the children that need private day are actually going there. Scott did touch on the fact that out of that JLARC report, for the first time ever, we talked about using CSA money to transition. We don't want private day to be forever. We want the children to get the care and the treatment, the stepped up level of attention they need. And as they begin to get better, we want to help transition them back to a least restrictive environment, back to our communities. All right, now that's tricky, right? Because mom and dad sent a child away that was having really difficult time. If that child is doing better, wait a minute, you mean we're going to bring them back and we could go through all this again? Well, that's where the transition services have to come in. And that is yet to be defined. We're going to be defining what that means. Now, Scott talked about the difference in the CSA match, which you all probably know very well, and the composite index. Right? That's a big deal when we start talking about moving CSA and then this private day over to the Department of Education. Because what is a phrase you have never heard associated with education in your life? Some sufficient. right? That's about as far from some sufficiency as you can get. So before we move it there, we have to make sure we understand what that means. And at the same time, just in my region, Williamsburg, James City County has a combined school system, and our composite index is like 74.74, meaning out of $1, we could pay 74 cents, right? The state has to make up the difference. Newport News is 29, right? They are adjacent to each other. So all of a sudden, when we start making these decisions, look at the disparity in cost. And you may or may not have seen your local delegate or senator knocking on your door to talk about these matters. No kidding. This stuff is super hard. There are 140 different localities with up to 3 different funding mechanisms in each. I mean, they've been trying to teach me this for 4 or 5 years, and almost every time I do something like this, I sit down and Scott says, well, not really. Like this part over here, what you meant to say was, right? It's super. You're getting close. I'm getting better. I'm trying. But so it's super hard. But the successes that you have, I think your local delegates and senators need to know. The challenges you have, they need to know. And then as we can make them more involved with people like Scott and others that are knee deep in this that can help you with your circumstances, regardless of where you live. Now, this private day, I am really glad that Stafford is here to talk to their experience. This was me like bringing in a whole bunch of different camps who all had different visions of what this was supposed to be. My good friend Richard Stewart and I work very closely together on a lot of things. He represents Stafford. He said, give me the money. I want CSA money. We're doing it well. We're going to do it here. You give me the money and go away. Let us deal with it. Then there are other parts that want the money because they wanted to set up what Stafford's got. But these students that we have, we need to make sure we still send them to private day and that you pay for them. Well, that's a little bit of the best of both worlds. But then we have regions of the area that are rural that are very, very difficult. You can't do it within a school system. So even on the peninsula, we have New Horizons. 7 different school systems come together to do a public day. But Newport News alone, when I first 2 years ago had like 83 children in private day, and I'm down into upper 50s now. So even with that specialized situation on the Virginia Peninsula, we're still sending a bunch of people. But this is a challenge not unlike the community services boards, right? Whether you're in Fairfax or Farmville, whether you're in Arlington or Amherst, you ought to be able to get the same community service board services and at a high good level, right? We know that's not legit. So we came up with STEP Virginia. Hey, man, we can come up with some really cool names and make things work. STEP Virginia is a great step in the right direction, but it's also my CSBs are some of the best in the state. We're struggling with elements of it. So Crossroads in Farmville and in that 5-county area, absolutely struggling with areas of it, right? And we have to recognize that. That's why what Scott touched upon Ken Plum's bill to try to, what's going on out there? What services should you be providing that you just aren't, right? And we don't want to come down on you and, the General Assembly is going to make you. So that changes everything, right? No, because we're not going to give you enough money to do it. What we need to do is understand what's the issue? What do you got? That's where these regional coordinators come in. These regional coordinators come out to work through best practices with you, for you, to help understand your challenges. What's the financial situation? Where are you short? Where, why are you doing it this way? So hopefully we're going to get a gauge on Virginia-wide to understand how we're doing, what we're doing in so many places, and then come back to see what we can do to augment it and to help. So this private day effort is quite an undertaking. Boy, you should see the different groups squaring off. I've got 2 work groups going this year. I don't think I'll ever do that again, even though it has been a great deal of fun. Now, so you've got the education trying to figure out what does it mean if we take control of this. You got private day saying, hey, man, you need to see the services we provide. And you have localities saying we want to do what we can do as much as we can. The example I always use, not unlike my public day on the peninsula, is the Northern Neck and some of the Middle Peninsula. So Lancaster and Middlesex, and they can never do this individually, right? What can we do if we could help them do a public regional day? So now all you have to do is go 10 miles or 20 miles in order to get those services. You're closer to home, you're in a least restrictive, but then you understand that at some level they may not be able to provide it at private days. So one thing we've stressed in private day is, unfortunately, your work will never go away. We're always going to have children with enormous needs that need this heightened level of attention that you're giving them. our goal and their goal is to make sure that it's just those students that get there and that everybody else works together to try to provide the services needed at a local level in the most efficient manner and with the least financial hit to localities that this is a big number, costs a lot of money. So it's quite an undertaking. But again, before I leave, family first, family first, family first. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of places you've always done things a certain way, and it's going to be easy to keep doing it that way. We have to build the evidence-based programs and get them out there, but please, please utilize them. No money from localities, and we're taking advantage of new preventative federal money. All right, foster care is a challenge everywhere. We need more. We need more families helping. But let me know if you have challenges in foster care. We're doing a ton of work on that side of it. And then, of course, private day is quite an undertaking, but it's something we got to look at. We got to figure out. And we're going to keep working on it until we come up with something, hopefully, that is better than what we have. And by the way, the system we have is pretty darn good. So we should always remember the things we do well. We're looking at these as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
That was really impressive. These gentlemen are a wealth of information. He had one slide and he talked for 15 minutes. That was great. I'm so excited that you're so passionate about what you're doing, Senator. It's been great. And I always learn something from Scott. I am not the expert on CSA in Stafford County. Our expert is actually Donna Kraus, who could not be here today, and she's actually was appointed to be on the Office on Youth when they were studying it. But I am going to go through for you. Let's see, is it this one?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
There you go.
Just to give you a little history on what we've done in Stafford County. So back in 2008, the state really encouraged a lot of the localities to focus more on the community-based services. So we had a woman, Heather Enfield in Stafford County, that created an idea. Our day school actually opened September of 2009, and we had 2 locations with a total of 15 students. The saddest part about this is she died of heart conditions like the week before we opened the facility. But her legacy continues on. In 2010, initial year cost savings totaled about $200,000. I was actually on the school board then and transferring over to the Board of Supervisors. We've been advocating for the state funding and incentives to support this public day school model while continuing to utilize our local funds to expand the program to serve additional students. And I'll show you that as we move along. So you might say, well, why did Stafford County do this? Why did Heather want to create this program? Why didn't we just continue with the private day school? And this is really why we did it. We established a partnership with our school board. It was a memorandum of agreement. And we wanted to provide these local services for our people in the community. We didn't want to put them on, in our case, Interstate 95 and have to traverse 45 minutes or an hour south and then the same thing coming back. Our model utilized parallels to the private day opportunity that was provided by Stafford County Public Schools through this collaborative partnership. But I do want to tell everybody here in the room, and this is really important, this model does not take or replace the private day school model. Kind of look at it as, you know, you have a lot of different tools in your toolkit. This is just another option. So I want you to really understand that, and I'm sure Scott and Senator Mason would attest to this, that it's just another option for you, and it may not work for all localities. Our Board of Supervisors is really committed to continuing this investment in the public day school program, and we have continued to fulfill the request for program funding and staff support. The county is also committed to expanding the program, and you'll see that in our numbers. I will tell you, about 6 years ago, we got a bill from the school board. It was kind of mid-year, it was $500,000 for CSA. And we're like, oh my gosh, we can't continue. I mean, because as you saw with the numbers earlier, the trajectory is up because students just have more needs now. So we went back and kind of established some criteria of accountability with our memorandum of agreement with the school board. But this gives you an idea, you know, you have your general education, then your co-teaching model, and then you go on up to the public day school, and then the private day. Then a lot of students have residential placement and then home-based modeling. So there are all different kinds of alternatives, you know, but they all start out in the general education. And as you know, the school principals make the decision typically on who might need additional services. So you ask yourself, let's see, we'll go to our next slide, you know, why public day schools? And I kind of touched on a little of this a minute ago, but it does create a resource right there in your community. There are a lot of parents that do not want to send their children south for 45 minutes. And what's better for a student than to be educated right there with their needs, maybe 10 minutes away? The needs of the population are continuing to change, as you've already heard from these two gentlemen. The issues are much more complex. I know about 2 years ago, I asked the head of our Head Start program, the Board of Supervisors and the school board, we were serving a meal to all the Head Start parents and children. And I asked the director of Head Start, what do you anticipate your biggest challenge to be? And I had been on the Head Start board when I was on the school board, and she said, Meg, my biggest concern, and we're starting to see it, are the parents of who were part of the opioid epidemic, and those children are now coming into our school system. So we're probably starting to see some of that now, and I'm sure Scott has information on that. They do have a much lower staff to student ratio, so they're getting a lot of very hands-on, you know, education in their respective settings. Our particular public day school, part of it is in one of our high schools, and the other one is attached to the back of one of our middle schools. Also, you have enhanced collaboration and shared services. This model allows for greater involvement of agency staff and families and provides an opportunity for shared service between the local governments and the local school divisions. You know, so our school people can go over there, you know, in a moment's notice if they need to, and any other staff as well. So here's a little bit on the cost, and I'm really sorry that this is so small. Hopefully you have the handouts that Katie provided in the back. But just to give you an idea, we have 3 different programs, Heather Empfield, Stafford High School, and the Belchers program. We didn't start out here. This is where the program has grown. And if any of these numbers aren't right, Scott, you can correct me. So, you know, in Stafford County, the cost to operate our day school is $40,000. You know, if you look at average for the state, for the private day, it's about $90,000. You annualize those costs, you're at $972 and $2,000,001. If you're looking at, this is where it gets a little complicated regarding the match rates, which I really don't understand. Donna indicated that, you know, if you're looking at a state revenue revenue stream, you'd be more like at $540,000 and $1,000,002 for private. So your total cost savings would be $660 just for these 24 students. Scott has a perplexed look on his face.
Yeah, that 90,000 seems a bit high to me.
It does.
We understand the per year cost for a private day student about 50.
Around 50.
Yeah, but I don't, you know, I don't know what where those numbers.
Yeah, I know in Stafford, for the last 5-6 years, that has been more like our number.
Yeah.
But, so anyway, whether the cost savings are $1,000,002 or $500,000, you
there are some cost savings out there, but like I said, this program is really not for everybody and it's not a perfect solution. But it's definitely an option. So just kind of summarizing, you're providing, all of your own local resources for this. You are not receiving any CSA money if you do a public day school. And, we have received significant cost savings, and that's kind of our model in Stafford County. Scott may be able to answer more questions about any of the details related to our public day program. Our community, I will tell you, has loved this program because the children do not have to travel so far. So we've had it in place for a number of years now. The nurse, we do not have an individual nurse that serves the day school because it is in one of our middle schools. So our middle school nurse is kind of helping on both ends. And there are issues down there sometime. I will tell you, for our day school, the intensity of that, as you all know, if you've sat on CPMT boards before, there's a little higher burnout rate with some of the teachers in that environment. And maybe that goes back to the fact that we need to compensate them more. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's kind of our little program in Stafford County. I know that the state has looked at, kind of using this program and others kind of as a pilot for the state. And I'm really not even sure where that stands right now, but I'm sure Scott or Senator Mason could talk about that. So anyway, thank you very much and I appreciate your time.
I would just add there's advantages other than cost savings to the type of program. In terms of children remaining in a public school setting where they have contact with non-disabled peers. They're part of community in a school, even if separate. They're part of that high school. And depending on where you are, that 45 minutes could be 2 hours in the car each way. And the cost of that transportation is borne exclusively by the school division. So that's cost offset. Whereas, the bus probably takes most of those regular bus.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point, Scott. Absolutely.
So there's advantages other than funding in terms of students' integration into the school environment.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the children that have attended our high school program and their parents, they've loved it. So absolutely. It's not always about the money, it's about the child.
As much as you can keep the child within his own community so that he doesn't have to go into foreign areas. This has been a great presentation by all of our presenters. I'd like to thank them all. First of all, let's give them a round of applause for doing that. Now, we will be moving to an online evaluation form, so you could I'm supposed to remind you that you'll be getting an email after the conference, and please fill out those forms. Now, we'll have some time for questions, and if you would please come to the microphone so that the people who are working remotely can hear what you're asking. So go ahead.
My name is Jerry Booth from Floyd County. I serve on Social Services Board of Directors and the New River Valley Community Services Board. First of all, family first, one of the greatest things once we get all the kinks worked out of it, and thank you for that. There's one area that none of the speakers spoke to, and that's the judicial impact on the CSA program. And that's where a lot of I agree, we want to keep these children in the home if we can. But some of the ones coming out of the judicial system have a violent tendency that you can't find a home for. You're going out of state to find somewhere to. So there's two things there, and I bring it up every time we have a new person. We put money out to attract business and industry in this state. It's a big thing, tourism. Why can't we try and attract some of these providers using money the same way? The other thing, is there any way we can put money into the judicial system so that at these juvenile detention centers, we have trained personnel that can handle what we do on the CSA, but also in an environment where those with violent tendencies don't impact the entire program? And I know that's a big mouthful. I've said it for years and I've been run out of the room, so thank y'all.
Yeah, so a number of really good questions in there. First of all, your community service board, New River Valley, has been really a leader in becoming a provider of these evidence-based programs, and I want to commend you for that because that's part of the public system, and you don't have to go privately to get it. Your question about services in juvenile detention is actually, there is, every juvenile detention center has funding through the Department of Behavioral Health for both a case manager and a clinician to, while the children are in detention, to address their mental health needs. The issues, of course, is they don't stay there very long. And so, you know, that's a short-term solution. And you're absolutely right that our ability to meet the needs of children with aggressive, violent behavior and high risk behavior in state is not great, to be quite honest with you. If a child comes into foster care, there's not a foster home in 133 cities and counties that will typically accept them. Same for group homes. Some of these children with the highest needs are, I mean, we're just really, to be honest with you, we're really struggling with them.
Maybe some kind of pamphlet to hand out to judges when they're appointed to let them know that you have these at the juvenile, because some of these juveniles, they're going into the system, whether they're arrested or whatever, and then the first appearance with the judge, they're put into these programs. So they may not even get a chance to do it within the judicial system. Yeah. And I know the court systems, like every other part of the budgets, are everybody's screaming for money. We don't have enough, but that's an area I think the state should really take a hard look at.
Yeah. So, but we have judicial members on the state executive council, and you know, if a judge orders a child into a placement, CSA will fund it. If you know, most of the time,
have to.
But then we have to find a place that'll take the kid. And,
right, and it may be harder,
and it may be, and sometimes
I was on the board of supervisors.
Throw a lot of money in it, and it doesn't help anything.
And the first director over it held a meeting in Abington. I was the only elected official in that whole auditorium full of social services members and community services, every other kind of mental health. And he told me then, he said, it's going to take us 20 or 30 years to get this straightened out. He said, you won't, he said, don't say that publicly. And I've waited that long to say that, but it's evolving, ever evolving. And we just have to work together. And I agree, the children are the ones that are the most important, but there's other things that the contributing agencies can do to help everybody out. And I'll sit down and let somebody else.
Scott is being very kind since he's in the system, but I have in these meetings heard Department of Juvenile Justice program reports and then had people say to me, well, they're doing so well because now we're handling all of them outside of the system. So I've heard that complaint before, that challenge, because the judge, you know, the judge is going to try to do everything in their power not to put a kid in jail. Right?
I understand.
And so you get the sense, you get the approach, but at the same time, it just puts stresses on different parts of the system. Right. I'll tell you a really interesting part of what you just said. It kind of maps to some, Christy is here from the Department of VEDP, Economic Development Partnership. At our last meeting, I bumped into her. I asked her the question that you just had, except about seniors. Other states have really aggressive senior management. where it's living on your own, then it's assisted living, but it's also mental health. It's like big complexes. Why doesn't Virginia have them? And if you're out recruiting business, why don't you go after some of these companies and then come back to us and tell us why or why not are you locating in Virginia? And go try to knock down some of these service providers. The same point could be taken that you just made for children's services.
I agree with you on both of
So
them.
I'll talk to Christie and them all as soon as we finish here on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Investment in children's mental health services across all the agencies is not Virginia's
Well,
strong point.
I mean, we have just, what is right now in the one adolescent facility we have like 38 beds out of 60 open. And when KD comes online with their hospital in Norfolk, it's going to have what, 78, 88? No. So it's going to really help, but that's 2-3 years away. I mean, right now we have children sitting in emergency rooms with nowhere to go. And we're bringing them from your part of the country down to Virginia Beach. And we're taking them from Virginia Beach out to your part of the country. And so right now, adolescent psych and geriatric psych is under substantial pressure.
Any other people have questions? Senator Mason, I have one for you.
Yes, sir.
It came up yesterday in our steering group with regard to staffing. Throughout the entire area of human services, the number of people who that are available in these services to provide them, we've got more demands for services. We have fewer people showing up taking that. Any thoughts on terms of what we might do to improve the staffing situation?
Thank you for that. I forgot one of Scott's slides to address just that. You know, the teachers haven't been very happy with me over the last few years that I've been doing this work, because I've said we're always talking about raising teacher pay, and we need to. But in Amherst, we heard from a group that you can make $15.64 an hour to work in child welfare, where you may end up with PTSD and you got to go take children away from families and homes, or you can work at the Hobby Lobby for $15.40 an hour. So we are not competitive in our salaries at all. And so just like teachers that you hear about all the time, first and foremost, we have to raise the level. Scott, we asked for a bunch of money in the last budget to bump up that salary. I'm hoping to see that in the outgoing governor's budget. Here's one that probably won't see the light of day this year, but I think I'm going to drop it anyway. I want to take about $250 million of the surplus. And by the way, everybody's got a brilliant idea what to do with the surplus. So that's why this is dead from the get-go. But I'd like to take a big chunk of money, and I would like to refinance student loans and student debt up to $25,000. That would give you 10,000 people that can refinance a loan that's sitting at 7 or 8% today, up to 25 grand, if they will sign a 3-year contract to come to work for us in social service. They'll get a 1% loan, and we'll take it straight from their paycheck. If they'll sign a 2-year deal, we'll give them a 2% loan. If they just come to work for us for a year, we'll give them a 3%. Right? We as the state are still making money. We're going to see interest rates climb, so that'll be an objection. We have to have someone manage the program. If they leave the job, we have to figure out how to, and there are a lot of issues, but we have a severe crisis for workforce. Mental health, social services, child welfare. Today, every time I talk to a professional, I ask them, what do we do now? Because this is the part that keeps me up the most. 3 to 5 years from now, I think our mental health system is going to be way better. I think a lot of this family first stuff, I think a lot of the things we're working on are going to be way better. I don't know what we're doing today to solve for the workforce problem 3 to 5 years from now that I'm not sitting here, and you ask me the same question. We have got to do things differently to incent people to go into these lines of work, because your professionals have master's degrees, and we're paying them, yeah, there you go. We're paying you $36,000 and you got $80,000 worth of debt. We have to do something about it. That's but one harebrained idea, but going into the schools, going into the universities, going into the community colleges, training people up for these jobs and trying to give them and find some sort of incentive for them to come out and go to work for us is the key. So that is a roundabout way of saying I don't have a great answer for you, but we're thinking about it, talking about it, and if we don't focus on it every single day, we're backing up.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? I have another question for Scott. You have been looking at some of the local administrations, the CSA. What kind of problems are you seeing, and are there any systemic problems that we can be thinking about as we're looking at this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think where we see the greatest success and effective program is where, one, the local agency heads and the folks who raise their hand here, as county government folks sitting on the teams, really invest their attention in this program. We have a lot of places that just see CSA as just a paycheck, a check to write and a budget to contain, and not a problem to be solved or solutions to be found about how to better meet the needs of children and families in your community in a cost-effective way, cost-effective. And we have some places where folks just see the systematic problem is where they see the program as it's just this coordinator's thing. And they take care of it and they bring us, papers to sign and there's not the level of investment, and I don't mean financial, I mean attention investment upon all the folks in the community. I think that's where folks don't do so well. Because if you're just looking at, what's the amount of money that's going out, then by the time that's happening, it's too late to fix that. You got to plan, you got to understand the needs of the families because they differ from place to place, and how your community wants to respond to that other than just writing a check for CSA.
I think also an effective way, find success stories. We've got to share success stories. Right now in the Virginia Peninsula, we've got a kid that came to Hampton University, full scholarship. His foster mom, by the way, 60 foster mom, sexually or physically abused in 12 of them. Finally gets stopped. Comes to Hampton, foster mom dies. He falls out of the system and is getting ready to fall off the plane. Members of the community pull him back up, save him, put him in the community college where he finds great expectations, which is the foster care network in our community college system. Pick him up. He ends up graduating from community college, ends up going to William & Mary, graduating from William & Mary. Now, guess what? He works in the Great Expectations program in Thomas Nelson Community College. So it is not a CSA. It is not a foster care. It's not a check to write. It's Anthony, who sits in front of you and tells you a story that makes you just go, wow. If we could tell more stories like that, that kid is helping me out front with my Chamber of Commerce and my aging out effort to get them involved. If you see this guy, you want to help. You want to get engaged. You want to get involved. You want to see. So in your communities, there are some tragic stories, of course. They're the ones you think about, you dwell on. There are also some successes. And if you float them out and get them back engaged, back involved in your locality, in your community, in your local government, all of a sudden it becomes meaningful to people when they can touch and feel a person whose life you saved with this effort. So that may be a little rah-rah, but I'm telling you, I've watched it work twice now, and I think this kid's going to be the linchpin in our effort to help us in Virginia.
That's a great answer. I like that. Foster families, recruiting foster families. Any thoughts on ways to do this better? We're having, at least in my jurisdiction, finding enough foster families to do it. We've gotten some of the churches involved, and that's helped to do this. Are there any other thoughts from anybody? Anyone?
Everywhere. That is for certain. That is the part that the faith-based community is helping me with the job placement effort, because they do have, and unfortunately it's because two of them run homeless type find housing shelters for people, meaning they didn't find a foster family. I don't know, Scott, you've been doing this a long time. I don't know what
the children that seem to have the hardest time finding a family are not the young ones, who through no behavior or fault of their own, they've come into the system. And, we see, somebody mentioned earlier, the opioid crisis. That has driven, that's probably one of the biggest drivers of children into the system now. So if you got a 3 or 4 year old and, their parents won't take care of them, those are not the kids that we have a hard time finding foster homes for. It's the 11, 12, 13 and up year olds who, so they're like, adolescents to begin with, and then they got a lot of problems piled on top of it. They're disrespectful, they're runaway, they use drugs themselves, they won't go to school. It's very hard to find a foster family for them. And I know my colleagues at DSS are working on some models to create additional levels of support for these families, to pay them a little bit more money to deal with these kids. But it is, you're right on target with that being a big challenge, especially for older children.
I might use Senator Mason's thought about an example where you talk about an example of a child who has really progressed and done very successful. I'm sure that we have some foster families who can tout that same kind of success. And I think that maybe using that as if you have a local one who has really been able to do something well, using that as an example to encourage other people to take that kind of responsibility.
There's an organization called, I think, Virginia Kids Belong. Janet Kelly runs it out of Richmond, and she's going to regions and trying to set up networks like this.
Okay.
But the success, she had a family who had a success story, and they had a tragic story. And so that's the tough part of this conversation. You want it to be a Disney movie at the end, and it very seldom is.
Yeah.
So you have to take the tough ones. This kid that I just referenced said that he couldn't believe that he finally got adopted. Because he said the only reason was the first year, she just put up with a lot of stuff that she shouldn't have had to put up with. Because every stop he'd been told, this is the one, this is your future, this is going to save you. And then they dumped him, let him go somewhere else. Why does he trust those things? So even he said he was surprised that she was an angel for sticking with it and doing it.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for our panel. That has been a really great presentation today. And I know that we'll all take something away from it, and hopefully we can do more to help the children in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.